Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to the last session, second last session, I should say, of the day. Unfortunately, I am going to show code for the developers in the room. We're going to do something so we can sort of play along, so to speak. But you're going to have to need a relatively fast typing skill to keep up. But it'll be great practice for all of you.
You're going to type or you're going to copy paste?
I'm not going to type. I don't type that fast. But it's a challenge for you, not for me. So for those who don't know me or haven't been to my earlier talks, I'm a software engineer here at eBay. I work on the Data Hub, which you might have heard a bit about, which is an internal analytics platform that we have based on Joomla. And I also, in the last 6 months or so, have worked on Compass, which is an external analytics tool for some of our sellers that we're running in beta status at the moment. We had a beta release about 2 weeks ago, so it's still pretty new. I'm also a platform maintainer. I do a lot of stuff on authentication, and in the past installing the update stuff. And I also have a few projects of my own. JAWS tools, which is an authentication library. I wrote the 1.0 migrator, the update manager, and some smaller extensions that may or may not make your life useful. So I said platform, but I'm also going to spend a bit of time on JavaScript. And I think it's interesting to think about where the project has come from in terms of JavaScript. And for those of you who are here before even 1.0 existed, some of that is still the same. But if we have a look at what Joomla 1.0 shipped, we didn't have a framework for any of this stuff. It was a mismatch. There was bits and pieces here and there. It was really not well organized, along with a lot of the CMS, really. For 1.5 up through to 2.5, we shifted over to using Moo tools. And the main driver of that was to make everything consistent, so that we had consistent behaviors and consistent looking JavaScript. Moo tools also extended JavaScript to give us a whole bunch of useful things. And I think the interesting observation here is that everyone says, why didn't Joomla just pick jQuery? Well, in 2007, jQuery 1.0 was, I think, the main version. And while jQuery has come a long way in the last 5 years, what you could do with jQuery 5 years ago was completely different to what Moo tools allows you. And while jQuery has a lot of stuff that Moo tools provides, it doesn't still have a lot of them. That said, we're moving on with 3.0, perhaps using Bootstrap and jQuery, and Moo tools are still there. And maybe 4.0, perhaps my pie-in-the-sky prediction, we're going to throw AngularJS in it. So why AngularJS? And AngularJS is the JavaScript framework I'm going to use for my talk. It's compatible with both jQuery and Moo tools. It has a jQuery compatibility layer built into it, so if you're not running jQuery, it'll bring its own. Angular can be used to partially convert stuff. So you can have an existing application, and then you can sort of put Angular into that application and get all of the benefits of Angular with the data binding and the updating without having to convert everything else over. As a JavaScript library, it plays quite nicely. One of the things it does have is a powerfully modular design. So the core of Angular is kept intentionally small, intentionally tight, so that everything that you can use through Angular, you can extend upon and then add your own services. So that even the core of Angular itself has been split out into multiple different libraries. And the great thing about it is that it appears to, I haven't really tested this to be honest, but you can run sort of multiple Angular applications in a single page. So you can have different parts of the page doing different things, and they don't all conflict with each other. So in this talk, I'm going to use a copy of 12.2-ish. Some additions have been made. I'm using a file package, actually one that Lewis made for me because it was nice. But there's some documentation on how you can build a file up on the website. Slides will be up somewhere at some point, so don't try and scribble that down. No. And what we're going to use the platform for is to build a basic web application and a basic services implementation. And by basic web, I mean it's going to do one thing, and it's going to give you one page. We're going to use AngularJS, and it's going to handle our templating via HTML. It's going to do all of our AJAX support. It's going to handle the data binding, and hopefully it's going to be awesome. Just a small hope there. So, I mulled over what app I was going to do for a while. I thought, I could do this, I could do that. I don't really want to do a to-do application because everyone does a to-do application. So what did I do? A to-do list. Because everyone does a to-do list. It turns out that I looked at the amount of time I had and I realized that to do everything I wanted to do would require an entire day. And they only gave me less than an hour. So hopefully it all fits. Fingers crossed. So the plan? What we're going to do is build a very basic services app on the Joomla platform. It's going to be a RESTful entry point into our database. And we're also going to build, after that, a more traditional web entry point. Again, not the most fully fleshed out, but enough to achieve what we need to achieve today. And then on top of that, we're going to swap to the front end, and we're going to write some JavaScript. And we're going to be able to interact with those services. And in case you haven't figured it out, the AngularJS library is what we're going to use. So, a little bit more detail on the process. We're going to set up the bootstrap. So I've got a GitHub library that I'm going to demonstrate and clone from to start with. And we're going to go for a quick walk around that basic bootstrapper thing. The hello world, we're going to have a look at the hello world controller, and all it's going to do is return hello world. Then we're going to have a look at how we would build a list controller that will invoke a model and return data. And then we're going to create the basic CRUD controllers so that we can actually update data. Then when we flip from the web UI, we're going to basically start with a static page. Very simple HTML, no magic involved. We're going to set up AngularJS on that page so that we can see how Angular works and how it adds different values to it. And then we're going to build out some pages. Well, that's a lie, it's going to be one page. But if I've got time, I've got a more complete demo app that I'll walk through and that shows you how to use more than one page. So for those playing at home, if you can very quickly go to that, if you want to, and clone that repo, and we can see how fast a typer everybody is. Now, does anyone have any questions yet? Hope not, because this would be weird. So does anyone want to play along, or can I move along? We're good? All those who agree, say aye. All those who disagree, also say aye. Aye. So, I actually cloned this before because I was reminded of the warning that said, by the way, you may not necessarily have an internet connection. So, here's one I prepared earlier. So this is a copy of that same repository via the Git repo. And let's just open this up. There will be code. Hopefully you don't get scared. Let's view you off. Expand all of this out. So this is a copy of, let's see if we can get that up. Side by side. So this is a copy of that repo. I don't have a pointer, but we'll make do. iPhone, also useful as a pointer. So, I have an etc directory. Anyone who's familiar with, oh, you've got a left pointer. Sweet. It's green. Does it come in red or do they go faster?
Yeah, it's not as bright.
So I'm gonna, and now I'm outside of the camera. I just realized, and the cameraman's on me. Cool. Sweet. I knew there were people smarter than me in the room. So we have an etc directory. Now this directory is where we're going to put our configuration files. To start with, we've got a config.dist.json file and a services.dist.json file. We're going to copy these to a config.json file and a services.json file, and we're going to extend them in this demonstration. A little later, I'm actually going to add a pages.json file that I realized as I was going through everything, I hadn't added the dist file to the repo, so apologies for that, but we'll cover that. In our lib directory, we've got a copy of the Joomla file that we're going to be using. So this is, you can download that. It's all ready to run. The README file has about 2 lines in it, which somehow come to 128 bytes. We've got a basic JApplication web extension here in the application folder. So I've got a little demo folder, application and web. And I also have a little test controller, which is my hello world controller. And that all that does is just return hello world, so you can see what's happening on. We have an import file, and that sets up this demo application so that it can auto-load with the autoloader that we added in the new platform. And last but not least, we have a www directory. So what we've started doing with the platform apps as a general rule is putting all of the code that doesn't need to be in the web root, not in the web root, and then having a specific folder, in this case www, which is going to be deployed as the web root. And so this would be your document root on the server. So instead of worrying about putting those horrible JExec or die checks on every single file, if it's not supposed to be accessible from the web, we just don't put it in the web directory. And now the cameraman gets to hate me again as I move back over. But now I have a pointer, so hopefully we can work on that problem. So the first thing we're going to need to do, and if you're a Windows user, I apologize because I am not. So we're going to jump into our www directory. Is that readable for everybody at the back there?
Yeah.
Cool. So in our www directory, we have a htaccess.txt file and an index.dist.php file. Now, the htaccess file, we just have a look at that, is basically a version of the same htaccess file that you would see on almost every other Joomla install. So we have some of the basic rewrite stuff in place, and it even still says Joomla SEF URL routing. So you can see where this has come from. Now, I'm not going to edit that file now. What I'm going to do is copy it to our htaccess directory, because what's happening is the directory at the moment doesn't have an index.php file. I'm also in a subdirectory, so what I'm going to need to do is edit the htaccess file, and change the rewrite base. Because I'm running Joomla this platform app in a subdirectory, I'm going to need to change the htaccess path so that it routes all of my URLs correctly. And hopefully most people are familiar with that. The other thing I need to do is, obviously, when I refresh that, I'm not getting to a PHP application because the file is called index.dist.php. The reason we do this is so that if as a developer you need to make any changes to the index.php file, there's a clean copy that's always tracked in the repo, but there's still the index.php file that you can edit and change and make any additions to, and it doesn't show up on the source control system. In this particular case, I'm not going to need to make any changes, so I'm just going to link that file straight across. So now when I refresh, we get an error. Okay, I haven't fully set it up yet, but I do have hello world at the bottom, so something is working. So what I need to do now is set up our configuration. So let's copy that. And we'll also copy the services one as well, which is actually what it's complaining about. Oops. JSON. Okay, let's refresh this. So now we have the most simplest services application in the world deployed. All it does is say hello world. You can't post to it, you can't put to it, you can't delete that, and it will not change. But we've managed to get across the line. So most web applications these days, I've found, they like to have a database connection. So let's go into our configuration file, and we're going to change it. So at the moment, we've got options to connect to nothing. So let's get rid of that, and we'll replace that with some options. So this should be relatively familiar, but basically we're saying connect to the local host with the username demo, password demo user, please don't hack my machine. And we're going to connect to that database, and we're going to use that database prefix. I'm going to save that. The next thing we're going to do, and I said this is literally going to be step by step, we're going to create a database. We're going to grant privilege to that. Yes, I know that's a security vulnerability because it grants you nasty stuff, but let's move on. And we're going to create a table. It's a very simple table. It's got a task ID, which is a primary key. We've got a name. We've got a text field. We've got a few other fields, a state field, and an author field. Similar to any other content table you might see with the Joomla CMS. So let's just run all of that. And now I should have JWC demo. Go. So we've got our table, but it's empty at the moment. Let's create something in there so that we don't have to look later. Live demos. Dangerous. Oops. Don't do it. We'll leave that null for the moment, and we'll give that a value of 0, because we haven't done this yet. So we've given it a name, could also be called a title field. We've got a little bit of content. We've got a created date and a modified date, a state for this particular to-do item, and an author, actually. So, next step is we need to actually create some controller to actually connect to this thing. So the first step, oops. Why am I not in the right file? First step is to create a mapping. So in our services.json file, we're going to map a path, in this case the tasks path, to a particular controller. In this case, we're going to call our controller tasks list. This is a sort of convention that I've come to working on the stuff at eBay, where the list things go to a controller that's suffixed with the word list to make it really obvious, and then when you have individual subcontrollers that we're going to get to later, they go to just this task or tasks controller, instead of having a tasks controller that can handle both lists of items and individual items. So we're going to create that and save that. Don't save. And then we're going to create a very simple controller. And let's save this. So code-wise, what are we looking at here? So we have a prefix, so demo service. Demo being the name of our application, service being the particular folder that I'm about to put this in. Tasks is the name of the controller, and that's a prefix that we've pulled in from the services.json file. So that's the same thing. Then we have list, which is the next part, and then this is going to be a get controller. So we're using the Joomla RESTful router, and it automatically appends the verb that we're using. So get, update, get for get requests, update for put requests, create for post requests, and delete for delete requests. We're using the new MVC with JController base, and so because it's a new MVC controller, we only have a single execute method, and in this case, it's actually the same as our original controller, where all it does is do hello world. So we need to put this in the file structure so that it's in a place that we can get to. So we have a service folder. This is our test controller that we had before, so we want to create a tasks folder, and create a list folder, and then in this directory, we're going to put our get. And now I get the syntax highlighted. So now when we go to tasks, we still get hello world. Let's change that so that we actually know that it works. There we go. Hello world with an exclamation mark. So we know that we're now going to a slightly different controller. So we've set up, we've got a default controller, which is doing not a lot, and now we've got this controller. So, oops. What we need to do is, replace this out with something useful. Let me make that a little smaller so that actually fits. And it's still not going to fit. Okay. So in this case, very simple. We're going to invoke a new task list. This is going to be a model that we're about to create. The first argument, this is a derivative of JDatabase model. JModel database, I should say. The first argument for it is actually a state object, so that we can pass in state to the model, so that the model's not going off to the request and trying to find stuff out. And then we're going to hand it the database connection, which I realize is actually going to give us a slight exception. Let's just change that slightly, because this is by reference, I think. or one of the things I use is by reference. It was giving me an exception earlier, a strict standards warning. Anyway, so we're going to get the data, and we're going to create a get list function. Again, this is very similar to the paradigm that we use in the CMS currently, and then we're just going to JSON encode that data. So instead of having the hard-coded array that we returned last time, the object we returned, we're going to return the data that we get from the model. So the next step is we need to actually create the model. So let's create the model. Now, again, based on the class name, so we've got demo, which is the prefix for our application. We've got task, which is the name of the task that we'll, the next level down, and list. So we're going to create this in a folder. Curiously enough, demo, task, I'm going to call it list.php. Now, for anyone who has used the CMS for since 1.6, this sort of syntax should be very familiar. So we're going to the database object, and we're getting a query. We're going to select a whole bunch of columns from our table, and then we're going to set the query, and we're just going to return the load object list. Very simple, very easy. So now, presuming everything goes well, we've now got that data coming through on our model. So live demos are dangerous. So far this one's been going all right. We didn't have a date created and a date modified. Our state is 0, and we have an author. So we've created a very simple service so far that will retrieve data from a database. So the next step in most of these tasks is to actually be able to add data. So what I'm going to use to add data is a JTable. I'm a very pragmatic person, and I believe that if there's a simple, easy way of doing something that already works, let's just get on with it and use it. And in this particular case, JTable does exactly what we need. It allows us to bind data, it allows us to save records, update records, and delete them. So in this particular case, when we're dealing with a simple single table, which is just this one, JTable will handle the job quite nicely. So again, we're using the same autoloader stuff. So in this particular case, because it's at the root of the thing of the folder, we're going to call it just task.php. Task.php. Create control. So the next thing on our list is create control. So create controllers, if we remember back, occur when we do a post request to our application. So in this particular case, we're going to, when a post request comes to the list controller area, which is just the /tasks, we're going to do this thing. Now, as you can see, it's not quite done yet, but we'll finish it. So we've got an execute function again. We're grabbing the database, and we're using that JTable we just created to instantiate it. The next bit of code there, but what we're going to do is from the application's input in the controller, we're going to take it out, and we're going to get the data. And we're going to pull these particular fields out. This is using the new JInput class that was added in platform 11.12.1, 11.4, something like that, and is also available, I believe, in 3.0 to retrieve the data out of the request.
It's in 2.5.
2.5? Sweet. Last but not least, and unfortunately at the bottom of the screen, we've got the task save, and we're just going to send a JSON response back with that object. So very simple in terms of controllers. All we're doing is creating essentially our model. In this case, our model is just a table. We're getting the data out of the request, handing it to the model to do something useful with, and then returning the current state of that object. I will note that we don't have any error checking here, but we'll have a look at what the error checking can look like in a slightly later class. So again, task, service, tasks, this, and create.php. So I introduce you to a tool called Postman. Postman is, and you can see I was testing before. Postman is a great tool. It's an extension for 15 minutes. Whoa! I knew I was going to go over time horribly. Postman's a great tool for doing all sorts of requests. As you can see, we can do get, delete, put, post, get, more posts, put, get, delete. So Postman's an extension for Chrome. If you start doing any sort of services development, particularly REST, I particularly advise it. So in this case, we want to do a create request. So what we're going to do is we're going to just cheat, because it's nice and easy. We're going to copy this object. I'm going to do a new post request. I'm going to get rid of that task ID.
We're actually done at 4:15.
Okay, so we'll do a post request with that data in there. And it's come back at the bottom here. I'm not sure if those at the back can see that. But it's given us task ID 2 and handed us back our data. You'll also notice it handed back the content field, even though we didn't request it, but that's a part of the object. In this particular case, it's also null because we didn't provide any data for it. Oops. Wrong file. So one thing we do note, task, there we go, is that the date created and the date modified aren't being set. So what we're going to do is we'll just overload the check function very quickly, and that's going to update and add the thing. And so now, just create a new request, and we'll get rid of that from our item. So now, we're updating. Very simple stuff, absolutely zero magic. So, now we can, and if we have a look at our list controller, we can see that we've got multiple items here. So the next step, it should be to support being able to retrieve a single item. So let me save this quickly and talk. Because as soon as I say I'm going to go quick, I go slow. So we're going to create a very simple get controller here. And we're going to grab the database, grab the JTable, load the JTable. We're doing a bit of error checking here, so we're going to check to see if we actually could load the task that we got from the request, and throw an exception if we don't. And then we're going to just JSON encode that object. So if we go right now and went to /1, we get an error. We're not able to handle this, because at the moment the application doesn't have a route for it. So what we're going to do is create a route for it. So now what we've done is we've added a new task entry, and we've used a variable with the new router called task ID. And what it's going to do is route that to this new tasks controller that we created. So now when we refresh, we retrieve the individual item. And live demos are still dangerous. So the last bit is you need to update and delete. So to update, very similar code to the last time. We're going to try and load the task, get a database connection. We're going to get the data out of the request, just as we did with the create. And then we're going to save it. Very, very simple. In some cases, you may even wish to set this up with just the same create controller as we used elsewhere, and just make sure that the task ID is in both places, because in this case, JTable will take care of that for us. But for this one, I felt it was better to keep it a little separate, so we'll just save that. And let me just change one option. View. There we go. So this is an update controller. So update.php. So now, /1. And what we'll do is we'll post to that, put to that I should say. So we've overwritten the file, the item, and we can refresh, we can see it's there. We can also go back to the database, and if we refresh the database now, we can see that it's also updated now in the database. It's also now added the date created and date modified because we've gone back through and saved it with the check method in place. And last but not least is the delete controller. So it's much the same. In this case, I put an exception in, as an example of how you could do that, I'm going to just do a delete. So there's an example of how you do that. Very simple. We throw an exception, and we're going to just grab the error message that JTable gets back to us. If we're doing this a little more seriously, we might want to check that that's not something sensitive like SQL error unable to insert into blah, 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 and mask that from our end users. But in this case, we're with friends, hopefully, don't hack my system, and we can be a little safe. So create a delete controller. And now all I have to do, so here's the URL we're using, /task/1, we do a delete to it, and we don't actually need the body here. Send that. So we get back the object that we just deleted, but now when we refresh, we get an error saying that this was an invalid task in nicely formed JSON. So I do believe I'm at time right now.
You can keep going.
I can keep going.
We got started like immediately, so.
Cool.
Yeah.
Half an hour?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
You didn't want to go see Brian and Ryan, right? No? Yeah. Awesome. So, for once it actually landed in the place I wanted it to land in, but in the wrong one. That's why I had that set. So, I'm going to use the command line because I trust the command line. So, and wrong phrase. Okay. Woo! Ugly. So this is our demo application that we grabbed before. This is actually already up on GitHub. We have a database driver that we're using. We've got a web router. We have a cache object for the sake of having a cache object. A few other things. We've got a default constructor that overrides a few things. Sets the start time so we can profile it. We have a get database that we've been using to get our database object. Load database to connect. And we also support JFactory so that legacy code doesn't break. Grabbing a router. So in this case, we're grabbing. What are we doing there? Oh, there it is. Right. There we go. So in here, what we're doing is in our do execute, we're setting this thing to make sure that we're returning a JSON response. We're initializing a JSON input object so that it'll take the JSON that we're sending it and split it back out. We're creating a new RESTful router, and we're setting the prefix to demo service, our default controller to test, and we're grabbing our routes from the services.json file, and we're executing it. In the case of an emergency, we're catching any of the exceptions that manage to bubble up this far, and we're just throwing back a JSON-friendly response object. Because one of the issues people have is that they have a JSON service, but then they return some weird HTML, XML mess back through the JSON router. And then the JavaScript interpreter goes, this isn't JSON, throws a nasty error, and all bets are off. This way, we make sure that there's always an exception handler, and we're going to return JSON in this particular case, so that our end user isn't going to see something that could potentially trigger an error on their side. In the case of PHP, if you try and parse invalid JSON, it gives you a null object back, and you have no idea whether you actually got a null back or if the JSON is just malformed. I think they consider it a feature. In this particular case, all of this has got to go. Because what we want to do is we want to have side by side our API as well as our web app, because we don't want to create another place to have our web app and store and do nasty stuff with. We just want to have it side by side, because that makes for an interesting demo. I think I can delete that and replace it with sweet. Okay, so this will take a bit of explaining, and Lewis is to blame for all of this code. All his idea.
I didn't write any of it.
So this is actually Lewis's idea. Even if he says he didn't write it, it's his idea. I stole it. So what we have is a check to see if the URI route is API. So what we can do is then, for all of our API requests, we're going to send it to /API. Now this inner bit is much the same, except even worsely wrapped on a large monitor. So we've still got our mount type, we've still got our JInput, we've still got the router, we've still got the prefix, the default controller, we're still grabbing our routes from that file, and we're still executing it. Slight difference is that we are trimming off the URI so that we get rid of the /API, because otherwise then you'd have to add /API to all of the services, and that really doesn't serve a useful purpose. But we also have an else statement. Oops, a little too much. And what this does is we use page prefix controllers instead of service prefix controllers. And we're going to use a new file called pages.json, and we're going to have a default controller, and we're going to execute that based on the route. In the catch, we're still going to do the stuff. So if it's a JSON request, we're going to treat it nicely, look after it. And if it's not a JSON request, just page that up to the center, we're just going to output the error exception message as a plain text and hope somebody knows what they're doing. Obviously, in a real application, you'd probably look at handling this a little better, perhaps redirecting to an error page, or maybe even outputting an error page and logging this instead. Depending on what tools you're using, that can be easy or slightly hard. So now if we save this and we refresh, we're going to get a nasty message again, because we don't have this pages.json file. That's cool, we can do that. Oops. So this is going to be our pages.json file. We're not going to define any routes in it. We may define routes later, but for the moment, we're just going to leave it blank. We can even put a new line there. We'll put that into our etc folder. Call it pages.json. Now, is the application happy yet? No, it's not. Unable to handle route. What does that mean? Well, we shifted everything to be /API, right? And this is now an API request. So if we put in /API, we still get invalid task, but we can still retrieve the individual task if we need to. So if we go to the root of the application, we now have a new exception saying that we can't locate the demo page control, demo page home control. So let's get on with it, and we'll create one of those as well. As you can see, this is an incredibly complicated controller. Demo page home, execute, and I'm being really lazy, and all we're doing is actually just reading one file and outputting it. In terms of controllers, it's a horrible abuse, but an example of a controller nonetheless. So we're going to need to create a new folder called page, and we want to call it home.php. So let's refresh. Yet another error. So what's this one? Oh, we don't have the index.html file. That's easy. So this is where it gets really interesting. Or at least I think it's really interesting.
What's a PHTML file?
Magic. Something to distinguish it from being a HTML file. So I've just created a blank file. Now we're back to nothing. So now we need to build up our file. Now this could be anything. In this particular case, I'm just going to use it to do a very basic container for my Angular app. If you were using a full-blown application, you might want to use theming or some other things and have it a proper full view layer. In this particular case, everything's more or less actually going to end up on a single page. And for this particular one, so we're just going to start off with a single page, straightforward HTML. Does anyone in the room not know what this means? Anyone? You? We'll talk later. So we're going to grab Bootstrap, and this is where we're going to grab some Angular stuff. So hopefully this line is mostly familiar to everyone, or at least to the designers. This one maybe not so much. So what we're going to do is load Angular, and we're going to load Angular resource. Earlier I was talking about how Angular is very modular and how they're splitting things out. Angular resource used to be a part of the main Angular build, but then they split it out. And obviously you can use a minifier to join it all back in together, but for the purposes of debugging and my own sanity, we're going to have it split out. And we've also got this little JS, app.js that I'm going to create, and it's going to store the application logic for this particular item. The HTML. So what we've done, added a whole bunch more HTML. None of this should be particularly complicated for anyone. We're going to template this out a little later, but we've basically got our task list. We've got a little add button at the bottom with an input box, and we've got a little remaining list that we're going to hook up. So let's save that and refresh that and hope that works. But it looks ugly, doesn't it? And I thought I included Bootstrap. So one of the problems we have is that we need to get a copy of Bootstrap and put that in our www directory. Now, cd sites eBay dojo.c template. So, where's my CSS? There it is. Bootstrap. So we'll copy that. We'll dump that in. And that's just a copy of Bootstrap, no magic, complete with halflings. And we're also going to need a copy of the Angular library. We'll just copy that in. So again, this is just the Bootstrap CSS that you get off Twitter, and the AngularJS. Normally there's a whole bunch more files, but I've cut it down to just the files that we need for this particular environment. So now if we refresh, looks decidedly less angry. And before I get too far, let's get the developer tools going, because I just know that we're going to have fun. So what do we have next? So at this point, we've created our services app, we've started on building, we've got the basic HTML. So what you need to do is tell the system that instead of being a body class, it's actually an Angular class. So what we do is we add an ng-app tag to it. The ng-app tells Angular, this part of the HTML, look through it and do something useful with it. I've also added a little hello world with curly braces. Curly braces are what Angular uses to say that it's sort of starting its syntax and its placeholder. So in this particular case, we've done hello and world. As you can see, you can do some simple stuff with it. It's definitely not logicless by any sense. And now when we refresh, we notice that the curly braces are gone and we just have the text hello world. If we inspect that, we can see that it now has the class ng binding and hello world. The stuff that we had in there has now been replaced out. So that as an application really doesn't mean much to me. So let's change this up a little bit more. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually define an application. In this case, we're going to call it to-do app. And we're also going to define a little controller so that the application knows what it wants to do on this particular page. And we're going to call that ng controller, app controller. Again, this is ng is the prefix that most of the Angular stuff is under. So anything ng something will signify that it's actually Angular doing something. So now if we save that and we refresh, the console should give us a nasty error message saying unexpected identifier, because we don't actually have an app.js file. So let's go ahead and we'll create one of those. So to define an app, we just create our variable to-do app, and it's an Angular module. And we also say that we're going to be dependent on ng resource, because later on we want to do REST requests, and we're going to use this particular library to help us out doing all of the magic for us. And this is our controller. Now, it's very simple at the moment. We're hard coding most of it, but we have our app controller, we have a scope, and we have an item that we're going to use a little later. And we have the list of items. At the moment, they're hard coded, but you'll notice that the name and the state map onto the field names in the table. And we're going to publish this in the scope. So we're going to make it available to the application so the application can use it. Is everyone asleep yet, or pretty near to sleep? Awesome. I should really put warnings on these talks. Bring caffeine. So we'll refresh the page. We still have an error saying
You have a mismatched brace.
I have a mismatched brace. I do too.
Line 9.
And that should be that. Let's try this again. Still get an error. Unexpected identifier after JS line 9. Huh. It's telling me that the file doesn't exist. JS, app.js. File is there. See if that's the problem. Okay, spooky. What are we doing? 644 for that. Okay, so Chrome is just being spooky. Nice. I like it when Chrome's spooky. So we've now added that, and we've got some data in our model. Now I can't get the thing back that I need. Actually, it should be. There we go. So now we need to go back to our file and do something useful with it. So at the moment we have this code, which is currently hard-coded. Let's see if we can replace that with something slightly more useful. So we're going to replace our UL with an unstyled class. We're going to use an ngRepeat. ngRepeat allows us to take a list of items and basically do a for each loop over them, except in HTML. So for in items, obviously this is written by JavaScript people because it's backwards, not PHP developers. And we've got our checkbox. What we've got here is, let's bring that up to the middle. We have an ng model, and the ng model tells Angular what part of the model do we need to look at for this thing. So in this case, we want to look at the item variable, and we want to look at the state property of that particular item. We've got an update function that we're going to use shortly to update it. And when we get to the advanced demo that I'm not going to have time for, which shows a bit of views, this automatically populates a route that we can use. And then in here, we're going to use the squigglies again to just populate the name into the list item and automatically create our page. So now when we refresh, we get no data. Ah, right. Why? Because I shouldn't need... I was trying to do a request for something and I haven't put that bit of code in yet. Let's refresh it. Okay. So now when I refresh, it's pulling the data out of the JavaScript model and automatically populating it. So if I refresh this infinite amount of times, it's still going to show me the same data. But we can see that it's populated the fields in the HTML straight out of the request. We'll inspect that. And there we go. So we can see ngRepeat for item in items. We've got a list item, and we've got the thing. And we've got actual HTML that we're looking at here. And it's automatically populated them straight out of our farm. So now at this point it's 4 o'clock, which I do believe is close to what time?
It says it goes to 4:15, but the next session starts at 4:15 also.
Right.
So
I'm going to go for another 10 minutes, and then after that, if anyone who wants to leave can disappear for the next session, which is Brian's talk.
Yeah, Brian and Ryan.
Brian and Ryan, the odd couple. Cool.
It's hard to hear you because they're so loud next door. Can you talk louder?
Maybe.
I think the other sessions probably got out, actually.
Oh,
So
the other sessions are out. Right.
They might have been, yeah. So.
I'll try. Shouting loud is not my forte. Anyway, so at this point we have our items. And we can't really do anything useful with them. So let's do something that we can't do in just HTML alone. Something that we would normally have to go back to the server. What we're going to do is create a computed property of this model on the client. And in this case, what we're going to do is use a very simple reduce function to work out what the current state of the item is, if it's truthy or not, and then add it to the value, and then put that into the remaining value in the scope. And then, actually, I know what I need to do. Goodbye, 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 goodbye. Don't save. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Bye, goodbye, goodbye. Hello. Much better. And now I can do ha. Sweet. So what we're going to do here is we're going to delete that, and we're a bit much. Replace that. And so we're going to use the remaining function. We're going to use our squigglies again to get the length of that. So that's just a standard JavaScript property, the length of an array, and we're going to put it in here. We're also going to set up this for later, and we're going to do an ngClick event for this which will map back to a model function I'm about to create called archive, which will go through and delete those tasks that we've completed. But let's just see this in action. Save. There we go. So now we can see that we have one of two items. The great thing about this is it's dynamic. So as we change the entries in the checkboxes, we can see that the remaining value changes automatically through the data binding. So we don't have to write any code to actually make that happen. And if I refresh again, we can see that it's back to the original state. There we go. So one thing we need to do is have an ability, apologize for that being at the bottom of the screen, to add a new item. So in this particular case, we're going to add a new event handler called add, and it's going to take a new item. We're going to take that new item, we're going to take a name value out of that item, that object that we're passed. We're going to set the state value to a particular value, and we're going to push that into our items array. We're also going to reset the name so that after it's added for the new item, that the text box goes back to what it normally would do. And so now when we swap back, let's replace you out. So in this case, we have another ng model where we're going to bind to new item, which was the name that we used in the other item, .name. We've still got our class, but now our button has a new ng click class that says, when we call that, add with this particular item class. And I've also added an ng disabled. Ng disabled is a special little Angular thing that allows you to tell, use JavaScript computed values to tell the text field whether it should be enabled, the button, whether it should be enabled or disabled based on the value of the text field. So when we refresh, we'll see that now the button has a disabled class applied to it because there's no entries in the text box. As soon as we start typing in the text box, we see that the button is now enabled, and we click add, and nothing happened. Add, refresh. What? Did I save that other file? I didn't save the other file. Generally helps if you save the file. Sweet. So now that we see the remaining, for some reason, is set to 2. That's probably a bug I need to look at. But we also, oh no, that's right. So we have 2 remaining tasks out of 3. Head was backwards for a second. So we have 1 completed task, 2 remaining tasks, and 3 tasks in total. And again, when we click that, it adds it. So now we're adding tasks. Next step. So at the moment, it's not particularly useful because as soon as I hit refresh again, I'm not as sorry to Brian and Ryan as I was just 5 minutes ago. I'm still sorry on the inside, but I'm not storing that anywhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an item factory. If you remember before, I had item in that I should. So what we're going to do is we're going to depend on the resource system, and that's going to create a RESTful controller for us automatically. We're going to use the, actually, let's see if we can use the mouse for this. I like color this. So what we've got here is the URL to our RESTful endpoint, and you'll notice that this is the path to our API that we have normally, and then we have what essentially actually looks like what was in that services.json file. So if we have a look at, if we get to that, if we have a look at services.json, we've actually got the exact same syntax in the services.json that AngularJS is also using. So you can see that the platform has a bit of a synergy there. We then, the next parameter for this is to specify that we should pass the task ID in when we have it, and that ensures that when we have a task ID that is populated. If it's not populated, then it'll just leave it blank. And for Joomla, because we do our updates via put, not post, to have the different controllers, we need to tell Angular not to send post requests when we want to update our object. Now we're going to add a very simple remove function so that we can remove it and that calls the base remove. And we're also going to default the state field for this particular object to be false, and we're going to return that item. The next task is to update view. So most of this, I think, gets to go. And we see our item back. So we're going to inject the item that we're dealing with. We're going to populate that into the item, and what we're going to do is we're going to query for the items from the request. The remain function is left the same. The add handler has had some slight differences to ensure that when we create a new item that we save it to the database, because otherwise it's just going to go into our internal array but never be persisted. And update is also going to trigger an update for the item as well. I've also fleshed out this archive controller so that what we're going to do is we're going to go through the list, we're going to filter, and if this item is completed, so if state is true, we're going to remove it from the list and return false. And if it isn't complete, we're going to return true, and that's then going to update the internal representation of items. So let's save that and check I didn't do anything. There we go. So we've just refreshed, and now we can see, I can't believe I only have 15 minutes left. Yeah, tick, wrong. 10 minutes maybe, yeah, also wrong. Past that. At the bottom here though, we can also see that we're actually actively making requests. So each time I tick that, Angular sent off a request to that particular item to update it. So in this case, items 2 and 3 had an update. We can also see the AJAX request that loaded those items. And now if I click archive, we can also see that those 2 items are deleted. So we'll just create a new tasks, and we can see that we created a new one. And if we go back to Postman now, we'll do a get request. We can see that we've now created our new object. State is null because we didn't populate that properly, and we created in the modified data set. If I now tick that, you should see that state is now updated to be 1 because this is a Boolean field. So, do I have much left? Oh, I've got 2 things left. So one of the issues we have is that when we refresh, you'll notice that the checkbox is now unticked. But if we have a look at the service response, we can see that the state is 1. So what we need to do is actually jump back to 2 places. Because what's actually happening is PHP is returning a string for those values, or a number, and not actually returning a Boolean value. And JavaScript is expecting a Boolean value and translating it to be something slightly different. So what we need to do is update our controller. It's already there. Oh, I'm in the wrong folder. Huh. Source, tasks, service, tasks, list. Good. So what we need to do is post-process the data. When we refresh now, we'll see that the box is properly ticked. So now as I'm over time, any questions, or do we want to just all run in an orderly fashion?
Right.